individual issues, and they really get off into some wild forms of interpretation in doing so. But one thing that I do want you to take note of is that it gives us the ability to go back and look at these passages from the perspective of how someone at that time would have most likely understood this passage in its context. If you look at the Mishnah, if you look at some of these writings from that time period, the rabbinical writings pre-Christ, here are some of the things that the rabbis said about this passage. First, they actually, from this passage, in thinking about the coming of the Messiah, actually gave him the title Son of the Fallen Tabernacle. Now, how did they arrive at that understanding? They already had an understanding that the Messiah had to be a descendant of David. And we see that in the very beginning of the New Testament. One of the primary purposes of the writers of the gospel, especially Matthew and Luke, is to prove the Davidic line that Christ descended from. In other words, they understood that the Messiah had to come from the line of David, and from this passage in Amos, they also understood that the Davidic dynasty had fallen, according to this passage, and had to be rebuilt. And in their minds, because of the fact that there was no longer a direct descendant of the kingly line in the sense of a direct heir to the throne person still left. In other words, there were still the descendants of David, but there was not a son of David in that sense still available to take the throne. And so the rabbis, what they say, they said, this could only be filled by the Messiah. The Messiah is the only one then that could come in and claim to be the son of David. By the way, that whole phrase, son of, means much more than simply progeny. It also means power. It's the idea of the heir. Not an heir, but the heir. And Messiah was understood as the son of David. We're going to see that here in just a little bit as we move into the New Testament. So in their minds, there was only one logical way that this prophecy could be fulfilled, and that was through the Messiah. There wasn't any other way that this was ever going to be brought to its fullness. Not only that, they understood that as I said a few moments ago, the kingly succession had been severed. It had been broken. There were still those that were being born in the line of David, but there was not that immediate succession of the Davidic kings. That was ending in this captivity and destruction that they were going to be carried off into. As I said before, not only that, but the eternal nature of the prophecies required the work of the Messiah. They understood that this one who was going to be seated on the throne had to be the Messiah. Nobody else could fulfill what was said of this person. You know, most of us, the vast majority of us, like 99.99999% of us, die. There's only one that hasn't, in the eternal sense. So there was only one in their minds that could fill the requirement of this office of kingship. Now, we're almost treading dangerously close to some of the things that Randy's talking about, and I realize there's going to be a lot of overlap on this, okay? Of course, that's really not bad for us, that's good for us, because we get to see it from several different directions. So, if that's the case, then we have to ask ourselves the question, has this text then been fulfilled by rabbinical standards? By the standards that they put on the text, has it been fulfilled? Not yet. Not by their standards. All right? Now we're going to see why here in just a few moments. Okay? We're playing with the words here a little bit. I realize that. But by rabbinical standards, this text has not yet been fulfilled. Let me give you a couple of reasons why. First, there is no Davidic king in control in Israel right now. Okay? Secondly, Israel does not yet possess the kingdoms of its enemies. All right? In fact, if anything, Israel is in a much weakened shape today. The physical nation of Israel is in a much decreased, weakened state today than it was at the time that Amos wrote this passage. And between those times, Israel has been in, quote-unquote, in captivity the vast majority of that time. If you don't realize, but there was only in time period a very short time that Israel was actually in control of the land, even during the time of Christ. For the most part, the Romans controlled it. There was only a very short period of time which it could be said that Israel actually controlled that land. Yeah, yeah. And all that was definitely over. It was actually over earlier than 70 A.D. 70 A.D. was basically just the time at which it was announced that it was done. But the Roman takeover started many years before that. So there's been practically no time, even since the time of this writing, that the physical nation of Israel has been in control of their own land, and certainly they have not been in control of the remnant of the kingdoms around them. So, I mean, that just hadn't happened, okay? Also, it remains to be seen even now if the physical nation of Israel is going to remain where they are. You know, I mean, there's nothing that says that they're going to be there, and certainly I would even ask the question, even if, according to the modern idea, and I say modern idea because it is a modern idea, the modern idea of prophecy, even if they were to remain there up until the time of the millennium and through the millennium, would that still qualify as forever? Think about it. Even if they were to remain in the land up until the time of the millennium and then through the millennium, would that qualify as forever? You see the problem? So let's look at this then. If it has not been fulfilled according to the rabbinical standards, then when we come over to the New Testament and we start hearing phrases like, this is what was promised or this is what was said in the Old Testament, what reason do the New Testament writers have for making these kinds of statements? All right? And that's what we want to look at. So, moving then on into the New Testament passage, and we're going to do basically the same way we did as we looked at the Old Testament passage. We're going to do a little historical work on it first, and then begin to ask some questions here. Let's just read the passage together first. And all the assembly fell silent. This is Acts chapter 15. And all the assembly fell silent, and they listened to Barnabas and Paul as they related what signs and wonders God had done through them among the Gentiles. After they finished speaking, James replied, "Brothers,